The next thing that we're going to talk about for changing and working with the living soil ecosystem is building lasagna beds. Now, lasagna beds are simply a fancy term for layered composting that uses a sheet mulch as a weed suppression. So it's a no-dig garden technique that specifically uses the observation of forest ecosystems and their annual deposition of carbon and nitrogen. So if you look at fruiting and nut producing trees, we have a deposition of nitrogen-rich material that lands on the ground that is then followed in temperate climates by a carbon-rich material that is deposited on the ground. So you have layers of nitrogen and carbon that are continually being built in a forest ecosystem that then results in this rich, dense, fungal and bacterially rich soil that helps to support the entire forest ecosystem. So if we want to mimic that, we are going to be adding nitrogen and carbon layers to build up a garden soil that will then be a really amazing grow bed to grow vegetables and whatever else. The key here is understanding that when we are depositing nitrogen layers on the ground, we need to have twice as much carbon that is added to this. Now, we're not going to get into the carbon-nitrogen ratios in great detail, but you need 30 molecules of carbon for every 1 molecule of nitrogen for a proper decomposition to happen. If you don't have enough carbon, you have more nitrogen, then you have more than 1 to 30 nitrogen to carbon, then you end up with bacteria that are growing too quickly, they're consuming the oxygen too quickly, which makes it go anaerobic, and without that oxygen, you get pathogens and disease that are then forming. So we want to make sure that we have an ample amount of brown organic matter, and this all depends on the materials you're using, and for that there is in the resources of this section a carbon-nitrogen ratio sheet where it talks about different materials, whether it's wood chips or straw or shredded paper, and what their carbon-nitrogen ratios are. And we need to always kind of calculate that down to figure out that we're roughly in the right window of carbon-nitrogen ratio when you're making composts and things like that. For the lasagna bed, we go with a more simple rule, which is going to be that you're going to go for twice the volume of brown material for every 1 volume of nitrogen material. Now, the way this garden starts, to go step by step, we don't cut into the ground. We don't dig up the garden bed as you would in many techniques. We would do, if you have compaction, is go with a broad fork and decompact that soil. And again, don't turn it over, don't till it up, just perforate the soil with the broad fork so that we can increase drainage and break through any compaction layers that may exist. What I like to do is go with a whippersnipper or a scythe or a sickle and just cut down all of the weeds that are growing in this patch that are existing already, and lay them down as the first nitrogen layer on top of the soil. You can put underneath, so the next layer is the cardboard, but you can put underneath this cardboard layer any materials that have seeds in them or any manures that are still fresh. But basically after the cardboard layer, we want more finished type materials. So you're not going to put vegetable scraps above the cardboard or fresh horse manure above the cardboard. All of that stuff goes below the cardboard. So you can take a bunch of unfinished compost from your pile, or kitchen scraps, or fresh manure if you've got it, and put that as a layer underneath the cardboard, and that will all decompose fairly fast underneath there, and be ready and decomposed by the time the roots of our plants actually get to that depth. The next layer is the cardboard, and a crucial step here is to not use any colored cardboards. In North America and in most developed nations, cardboard doesn't have contaminants in the dye because the dye is actually soy-based. However, that soy is genetically modified soy, and a lot of the products that come in boxes come from all around the world. So we don't necessarily know that that box was produced in a way that has a natural soy-based ink. So don't go for reds and blues and yellows. Stick with cardboard that has black ink. Black ink is always a carbon-based ink. So you want to soak it overnight so that that cardboard is nice and moist. And if you don't do this, many people have done this before, and I've done this before in the beginning, where you're like, I forgot to soak the cardboard. Whatever, I'll just soak it with the hose. If you try this, and go ahead and try it, you'll see that the actual surface of the cardboard gets moist, but most of that water runs off, and the core of the cardboard stays dry. And what happens now is you've got a dry cardboard layer in the base of your whole garden that is going to be sucking moisture and keeping the garden drier than it needs to be. So that's the first fail we can avoid. Soak your cardboard overnight. It's also going to make removing the tape and the staples a hell of a lot easier. So soak it overnight so that you can remove that tape and those staples incredibly easy, and then we can move on to the next step, which is laying it on the ground. I like to lay it 2 layers thick, and I've seen many people who use newspaper. I've tried using newspaper early on because it was something that was easily accessible, but most of the weeds will push right through the newspaper, even at 20-30 pages thick. So don't bother with the newspaper. Go with the cardboard. It's fairly easy to get your hands on, and it's easy to work with as well. When you are laying the cardboard down on your first nitrogen layer, you want to make sure that you have a minimum of 8 inches overlap. So this is like, we're talking 40 centimeters overlap. And this is because if you have a shallow overlap or you're butting your cardboard up side by side, we'll have weeds that will push through. And a guide, when you're looking back at the cardboard layer, if you can see grass anywhere, little tiny holes anywhere, this is where weeds are going to come up and through, and the whole purpose of the cardboard layer is to smother out the weeds, but after 4 or 5 months, the cardboard is completely decomposed and there won't be any cardboard to prevent weeds from growing. So if the weeds slip through in those first couple months, then you've lost the entire function of the cardboard, which is weed suppression. So now that you've got your cardboard layer overlapped plenty and you've got it soaked and all your tape and staples removed, we begin the nitrogen, carbon cycle of adding layers. And you can do this once. I've done beds where I have only weeds on the bottom, then I have my cardboard, and then I have composted wood chips on top, and that's it. And this is fine if that's all you've got, but the more materials that you have, the deeper the soil is going to be once it breaks down and composts and builds that living soil bed for you. So I like to, every few years or at the end of every year in the fall, add a new cycle of, compost or manure, and then more leaves in the fall, compost and manure. And every year your beds are getting thicker and thicker, rather than the conventional agriculture and market gardening, which is your beds are getting shallower and shallower every year, right? So we want to increase the volume and bulk it up every year. The benefit here is by having the right carbon-nitrogen balance, we are feeding the organisms just like in a compost, and you get this bioactivity that is present that is going to be producing all of the conditions required for your plants to grow. Remember, plants don't need soil. What they need is access to bacteria and fungi who will then provide them with nutrients so that they can grow. But the idea is that you don't need soil for the plant's roots to grow. You need a substrate that supports the soil, supports the plant, and you need a nutrient supply. And so by having the layers of the garden bed, we have plenty of structure for the soil roots, for the plant roots to grow in. And we have all the recipe of ingredients to provide the right amount of bacteria and fungi to then feed those roots as they grow. So if you want to, experiment, go dig through a pile of leaves in the spring. You'll see tons of seedlings that have a nice root system in a pile of leaves. And in that pile of leaves, there are fungi and bacteria that are supplying the needed nutrients to those plants. So ensuring that as you add your carbon layer that you have twice the thickness as your nitrogen layer is going to be a good kind of guideline to get you going. And you simply go with these layers repeating until you're done. And the most important step here is to finish off with a carbon layer. And I like to save my prettiest carbon. Maybe it's straw, maybe it's a nice mulch, wood chip mulch. And I use this as my top mulch so that way it has some aesthetic benefit as well. It's all uniform. It's not just a mix mash of leaves and random things, but it's something that looks aesthetic and is appealing to the eye. Now the key with the lasagna bed is understanding how to plant. If you're going to be planting woody shrubs or trees, you need to plant them before you do the lasagna layers. If you are planting annuals and even tiny little shrubs as in rosemary or thyme or something like this, those can be planted after the lasagna bed is built. So once the bed layers are built, you pull away the mulch and you put a pile of good soil, If you're putting a bit of compost, you can do that as well, but you don't need to do this for many plants in the early transplant stage. It will actually stunt their growth because they'll become dependent on the compost and won't go looking for nutrients. But what you want to do is just put a little bit of soil in that patch and plant your seedlings in that area. If you're planting seed, well, you're going to clear out a bigger area, and in this bigger area, you're going to put a good seedling mix of soil, and you're just clearing the top mulch layer. You're not clearing all the way down to the cardboard. You're clearing just that top mulch layer and then putting in the good soil, planting your seeds, and you're going to watch that area. And yes, you'll have to weed that area, but it's going to be a lot better than weeding the entire bed. What I do is, as the seedlings start to come up, I'll pull the straw in and just lightly begin to start mulching that area. And as the plants get bigger and bigger, I will add more and more mulch to the area.